How you guys doing? Welcome to In the Spread. Once again, I'm Cory Allen, and what you're about to see is a little segment that we did illustrating how you guys can approach and tack a channel adjacent flat. Now, channel adjacent flats come in all different shapes and sizes. They're caused by different formations, whether it's a silt deposit from a delta coming in. The ones that occur on Melton Hill a lot of times are literally part of a structure situation. It's a little bit unique to this as far as being in a musky system, which is basically where the water that is outside of the channel is shallow and the only deep water coming in is from the side, the tributaries that come in. So they cut into the channel in the flat and they make these areas of deep water that literally intersect. So we fish those flats, but almost any southern reservoir fishery you fish, you're gonna find some situation where the geography and the water flow has at some point created a channel adjacent flat. And sometimes they can be intimidating. Sometimes people don't know how to attack them. A lot of the big struggle with it is a lot of people don't really understand how to correlate shallow water to deep water without it being directly correlated to the bank. And it's just a confidence thing, and that's what we try to do. We try to teach you how to be confident in concepts and things you might not be familiar with, things that go outside just what you visually see when you're fishing what people call structure. This is real structure. This is real structure fishing where you're focused more exactly on what the bottom's doing and everything else just kind of falls in on icing on the cake. And that's what I really hope you guys take away from this is you're gonna have the confidence to go out and find these structures that aren't just sticking up like sore thumbs. It's not a lay down, it's not a big point sticking out. They literally, to us, it just looks like flat water. But to the fish, it's home sweet home. All right. This is Cory Allen in the Spread. We're continuing our series on musky fishing, and today we are on a reservoir, Melton Hill Reservoir to be exact. And right now we are dealing with the end of the transition between spawning and post-spawn back into kind of their normal routine. So right now we've got fish that are traversing from the creek arms and the side feeder stream cuts from the channel to the main channel, and they're moving back out to get into kind of what they do all summer and into the fall. So right now, I would say probably 80% of the fish are well done with the spawn. A lot of them are already kind of back to norm. And it's a cool opportunity. Like, it's one of those times of the year where in the summer, a lot of it's trolling. In the spring, most of it's casting, at least in this situation. This is the kind of time where you start to cover the whole spectrum of the water column. And you can catch fish trolling and then casting and then jigging, and it's kind of fun. It's kind of where everything kind of comes into play. But right now, cast number one. We're gonna be fishing out here off of a big flat that is the juncture of two river channels, one forming this cove and one being the river channel that formed the actual lake itself. And you have to remember that is every time you're fishing a reservoir, I like to describe reservoirs as interstates with exits. And reservoirs don't even exist unless there's a creek to dam up or a river. And so you really have to base most of your interpretation on a reservoir off of the channel. So when I'm analyzing stuff like this, looking at a map, I'll be able to pull up a map a little bit later to show you, I look for these junctures. Now, this is a big one. This is like a real black eye spot. Like this one sticks out. Some of the smaller ones are if sometimes not even more crucial. Like a lot of the spots, there's a few spots on this lake that are little bitty streams that flowed into the main river channel when they formed it. And I've caught some big fish off of those over the years, and some of them aren't even really marked on a map. But to start out today, we're gonna check the shallows, see if anybody's home up here. Then we're just gonna start working our way out, working our way back in. I'm going to try to illustrate how you should focus on things like this. But no, right here we're literally sitting at the intersection between side channel, main channel, point. Something like that is almost crucial any time of the year. Like there's fish that use this area almost all year. The only time you won't see a lot of fish here is about a month ago because they'll be moved back into coves. There'll be a few fish that I've seen try to spawn on this stuff. It seems like a lot of times they're still drawn to the back of the coves, especially in this reservoir where There is a cooler water influence in the summertime. Now, that's a good thing, or all year. It's a good thing in the summertime. It helps keep them out here, not just the depth, but especially back in the coves, there's a lot of warm water. They can sense that, and that's kind of what they're drawn to by nature to go get it on. Pretty rapid paced. I mean, I know it looks like we're going slow, but we're gonna fish down this fairly quickly. I want to be thorough, but I want to be efficient. And right now I just started out with, actually made this yesterday. I took a single 8 spinner and I'm fishing through some weeds today. So instead of having the treble hook, changed it out with a big old gamakatsu and I put a swim shed on the back. So it kind of swims a little bit and it's pretty weedless. So that's cool. One of the cool things too about this, I see a lot of guys, it's just kind of standard issue, I guess, for most people when they fish. They'll sit in the deep water and they'll throw to the shallow. And there's obviously times and places where that's the most efficient way. A lot of times you have these big expansive flats like this. We'll check the top, but there's a lot of fish that will just be sitting right on the edge, right where it starts to slope into the channel. And kind of one of the little things that I've learned is it seems to kind of trigger that genetic response, I guess would be the best term. That if a fish is pursuing something, prey doesn't really evade to deep water. Prey evades the shallow water. So a lot of times when I'm fishing, instead of sitting out in 40 feet of water throwing into 4, we're sitting in 4 throwing out to 35. And we're bringing it up over that shallow water. We're not really fishing the 35, but it's almost the angle, like the approach vector of it that I've seen a lot of times, like it'll trigger fish to have a more aggressive response if it's going over their head and moving towards shallow water than if it's going from shallow water over deep water. And something I don't see a lot of guys do, there's definitely a lot of applications for it, especially as you go up north. But a lot of these reservoirs too, especially in the south, they'll have these instances where people are really focused on fishing the shallow water. We're fishing shallow water, but we're hitting it from a different angle than normal. And as honest, as always, kind of not been too true to it yet, but that's almost anywhere I'm fishing, no matter what I'm doing. Once every 5 casts, 10 casts, I'll literally just chuck it behind me just to see. That's also if I'm fishing over deep water and throwing into shallow, because a lot of times, you know, that looks so cool. We're gonna continue down this break just a bit. This is a nice cut. Like there are times of the year, especially starting about right now, where they would use this ledge like pretty commonly. But the thing that gives it like areas what I call staying power is any kind of like structural anomaly, like any kind of differentiation. So like a break line's good. If you have deep water, shallow water, that's all you need. But that's why areas like this juncture over here are so good, where it's like it's a literal point finger made by the channels themselves. There's another little one down here. One of the cool little things about reservoirs, especially that people should pay attention to more than anything, is definitely more than natural lakes. The shoreline itself is just a reflection of what's underneath the water, and that's how you can find some good spots that aren't even on the map. Like I've noticed before, we'll see like a little bitty creek flowing in from the bank. And it might not be a lot, but stuff like that, especially little coves, because right now there's a lot of, like this looks like a big open lake. Like I said, it's 3 feet of water right now. We're kind of sitting over the middle. This is a tendency of these run-of-the-river reservoirs where the bank where they flooded it up to, it's shallow, it jumps the bank of the old river channel, but not by very much. And most of the deep water you're dealing with is directly correlated to the river channel itself. But then, like I know, like this spot kind of see around the corner, there's like a little cove. Most guys would just kind of go into the cove. I've never really caught any fish out of that cove, to be honest with you. I've caught a lot of fish where the creek that formed that cove hit the main channel. That's something to be really aware of, is like start your interpretation with reservoirs. Always start with the deep water and then find the paths that fish are going to use to get shallow. That's seasonal, that's daily. Like in the spawn, for instance, what we're talking about is like they'll follow the same paths, topographical routes into their spawning bays. Sometimes it's up a river, sometimes that's back in a cove. But things like that are very, 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 very important. So we're switching out baits a little bit. No big. All right, so right now we are setting this as post-spawn into kind of normal musky mode. We're sitting at the juncture of the main river channel, which is the river channel that formed the lake itself, with a dam, and then a very large, very productive cove to which fish go to spawn. And some will actually take residence there. Right now we're fishing the literal juncture of those two streams, river channels like that. And as I was saying, when you interpret things like this, doesn't matter the time of the year, even if the fish are shallow, as in seasonally shallow, when they're less than 5 feet of water for the spawn, you want to always start your interpretation of things from the deep water so you understand how they get there and where the best places are they're going to be found. And the paths of the deep water will always lead you there. It's kind of one of the cool things about reservoirs is it's very, once you understand what you're looking for, it's very easy to interpret, because basically you're just looking for the veins that fed the artery that is the main channel of the lake. And like, for instance, a lot of times when we talk about a reservoir, and this pretty much goes for all species, you want to start your interpretation. Somebody's in trouble. You never know. So I was saying, you want to start your interpretation from where the deepest water in the area is. In a situation like this, almost always in a reservoir, the deepest water is going to be in the main river channel, just by the very nature of the construction of them. So right now we're fishing the literal junction of the two river channels like this. They actually make a point. Like a lot of times people refer to points. Natural lakes have points. But in this situation, a lot of the points are actually made by the convergence of the river channels themselves. It's very important. Stuff like that is very important. A little bit earlier, I was showing a bait that I made literally just last night. Didn't make it from scratch, but I took a single-bladed spinner made by London. It's called the S8, single 8. And instead of having a treble hook, I actually put like a soft-bodied shad on the back with a gamakatsu hook, so I could fish through weeds. And that works really well. It's just a steady retrieve little bait. It's a good small size. Don't underestimate these things. Lots of big fish, probably more so cast for cast, come on the smaller things than the big things. So I checked that and I didn't have any results. So now I'm going to cover the same water, slightly different presentation. It's a shallow invader. It's a very good all-around bait for almost any situation, anywhere. We'll be trolling it later. Right now we're casting it. But just to start out, this bait will probably go 4, 5, 6 feet if I really work it down. But I just kind of want it to slowly meander across the break line. I'll occasionally twitch it. It has a slow rise, so when you twitch it, it'll kind of glide out and then rise. But a lot of times it's almost best just to kind of fish this one out of the box. Yup. So I have to admit, I've tried to be a little bit artistic with this bait, and it seems like 9 times out of 10, it's more of a straight retrieve bait than anything. Like, of course, there's nothing that says you can't vary it up on an individual retrieve. Just twitch it. So we have covered this shallow water, and I've taken us pretty close to the break line. So now what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to switch out and put a slightly different bait on. I noticed coming into this cove, I was aware that there were some shad that were moving in off the break. Sometimes fish will sit right on the break even when that's correlated. Sometimes they don't. And so we're going to capitalize on that. I'm going to take a bait that runs a little bit deeper. We're going to make 2 passes down this with this kind of presentation. One of them I'm going to use pretty cool new little swim bait that came out this year. It's called a Swimmin' Dog, and it's based off of various Swedish style swim baits with a built-in harness. This bait's really cool. There's really almost no wrong way to fish it. But of all the swim baits out there, I always pay attention to one thing importantly: how does it fall? Because most baits you reel into the water and they do their thing. The way that bait falls with that slow glide out, slow hang, and then the tail pumps on the way down. It's very crucial. A lot of swim baits that they've made the past few years, it's like they run them in a tank and they say, oh, okay, it swims. And they don't really pay attention to the weighting of what it does on the fall. So as you can see right now, I'm letting it sink a few seconds, trying to get it down maybe 8, 10, 12 feet, pump it, let it fall. And I can actually feel this bait as it falls. You can even see the line kind of move a little bit as you do it. And as we get up closer to the break, then I'll just start reeling it in straight. Areas like this are particularly cool too, because I can literally cast, if I really wanted to, I could literally cast to the point on the other side. It's like a huge choke point. There's a lot of fish that can just be sandwiched into these areas. You can almost cover the whole thing. I don't know if you can tell, but every cast I am really carefully looking behind the bait. A lot of guys that do the figure 8 thing, they're already on to the next cast by the time they're doing their figure 8 and they're thinking about it. And it's good to have a plan, but I'll be the first to tell you, there's a lot of fish that won't be right behind the bait. They'll be following the wake trail 10, 15 feet behind. And there's been a lot of times I know guys have pulled the bait out of the water and the fish had just gotten to the boat while they're casting. Might notice too, like, as the different retrieves I go through on a bait, like I'm kind of jigging it right now, kind of moving it up and down, change the angle of my rod grip accordingly. At first it's a little bit foreign, it's a little bit difficult to kind of get used to. But once you get it, especially with these big 9-foot rods, like, just go from holding it like this, bracing it. Just gives you a better grip and a better motion to lift it up and down. Because right now, if I swept it side to side, I'd be moving it more laterally than I would vertically, and I'm wanting it to bound. Come up, fall, come up, and fall. As I get it closer, you notice that, man, I just do it instinctively, but it changed my grip accordingly. One long, slow retrieve cast with this bait over the channel. And then we're going to try something a little bit different, because we've got a concentrated area here. Like, I can guarantee you there are fish between that tree and that point right there. There's no question in my mind. May not be active. We're going to try to trigger them, but they are here. It's one of the things you have to really get accustomed to. Is I know a lot of guys that blaze through a spot with 1 or 2 presentations, and well, they're not here. There's no fish here. No, you've got to have confidence that. Got to have confidence in the biology of these fish and like what quantifies as habitat to them. Because Because if there's habitat, especially something this good, you can be rest assured there are fish in it, utilizing it. Don't just go through it with one presentation. I mean, it's taken us, what, maybe 15 minutes? We've gone through 3, probably covered depths all the way from 5 feet to, you know, I'm letting it sink out there. It's probably 15. This little cut in here, though, I've had some big fish come out of this. So next, we're going to do something a little bit different. This is actually something I kind of didn't come up with the bait, but these are really cool little unique baits. They don't look like it, it just looks like a spinnerbait. This is a Lungin, it's called a Nutbuster Junior, it's a double Colorado. The cool thing about these baits is I've never seen another spinnerbait do this. Yeah, it works when you reel it in, you know, I mean, what spinnerbait doesn't? But the cool thing about these, is you can cast them and reel them in like this, and that's just perfectly fine, they work like that. But that's the secret right there. When it falls, the blades counter-rotate. You have to take the grub. They sell these things with the grub actually threaded up on the hook. Kind of messes with a little bit. It'll make it like kind of turn as it falls. I want it to fall straight down with the weight of the head. So I just bite it off and put it on the end like that, same deal. But it removes that element where it doesn't like spin as it goes. So with this in mind, how I fish this bait is like this. So we've covered suspended water, fished out over the channel. So now I kind of want to bring something right up the break, just a little bit. Nothing too intrusive, but I just kind of want to hop it up the break a little bit like a jig. Cool thing about these though is the slow rate of fall. Like I use jigs a lot, but these in particular, the way that they fall, and they have that slow counter-rotating blade engage thing, and you lift it, you might get their attention, and then when you drop it, that's when they come up to hit it. And the other cool thing about these two, yeah, you're always going to be fighting the weed war. It's not going to stop a fish, believe you me. But the other cool thing is too that I've learned about these as opposed to jigs, is jigs are really prone to getting snags. And there's at least one big one out here that's taken a few 20s out of my wallet. But I've never lost one of these on it. It's that safety pin style spinnerbait stuff. So right now we're moving ourselves actually off the flat. We're right on the edge. Trying to keep it right on the lip. And I'm not wanting to long bomb it because it turns into almost a painstakingly long cast, which isn't a bad thing. But I'm wanting to keep the boat maybe about 8, 7 feet right off that break that we've already covered casting with shallower presentations. So I'm condensing the area that we're straining a little bit. When I bring this in, I don't want to rip it up to the boat. Bring it in nice and slow, really deep. I do one of the fall things. And I'm literally just letting this thing hit the bottom. It landed pretty deep out there. You notice too, I'm not letting it fall under slack. I'm letting it fall, I'm letting it fall. I'm controlling it. I'm not really trying to slow it down. I'm not trying to let it down. Or I'm not trying to slow it down. I'm not trying to halt it. But I'm literally wanting to just go down with it. Because a lot of times when the fish hit this kind of a presentation, that's when they hit, is on the fall. And if you're doing this, like you notice right now, even when I'm throwing it out and just watching it hit the bottom, it could be going down past the 50-inch fish right now. And I've had this happen before where fish will intercept it as it's falling on the initial cast. So I'm watching it as it goes. Because I don't want to miss it if something hits it. And they might not beat the crap out of it. A lot of times they're just going to go. Let it fall down. You can feel those blades. And man, this is something. I've not seen a lot of guys do this. Actually, I don't know of any. I know some guys that slow roll things. I don't know any guys that really fish this like this, but like I said, this is the only spinnerbait that I've ever seen do it that well. Or at all, to speak of. And the first fish I ever caught doing that was right there, and it was 51 and a half. There we go. So I guess the technique, I always forget what they call it. I think in bass fishing they do something called yo-yoing, I think is maybe what they call it. It's similar to this, but this is one of those things that I talk about where bass guys have a lot to learn from musky fishermen. Musky guys have a lot more to learn from bass fishermen. That's my opinion. Stuff like this requires a level of innate finesse. Not like super finesse, but you're not just chucking and grinding. You're paying attention to your bait. There it goes. We're literally just going down, like it's 8 feet right here. Perfect. Just following this brake line out. There's a big tree I'm actually trying to get it past right here. It's down about 12 feet. Fun, interesting fact about reservoirs it's just kind of funny how it works out. You have to realize, and you have to imagine too, like what this was before this was what it is. You know, a reservoir is just nothing but a dammed river valley. As in impounded, not dammed. But you have to think, where did things like trees and foliage and stuff grow? And they grew on the side of the river channel. They didn't grow in the river. And it works out really cool, often to our advantage, to pay attention and look for things like that. They're definitely not the most important, but the cool thing is, whenever you start fishing topography like that and you start paying attention to the river channel more than bank cover and all this stuff, you start to find things like that. You start to find things that were part of nature before we came in and messed with it a little bit. So like right there, that stump, that's a tree that grew on the side of the river channel a long time ago. It's dead now. It's been dead for quite some time. But it's cool how much life will actually relate to that. And it's not because it's a tree. It's just because it's something that sticks out from something that sticks out. All right, I'll tell you one thing that like I try to encourage people when they fish, and this isn't just casting or jigging. It's trolling too a lot of times. I'll show you later today. I'll have a rod, maybe 2 out in a rod holder, but I also troll a rod so I can manipulate it a little bit more. This is all a very mental thing. In fact, it's all mental. Very little of this has anything to do with, you know, just sheer effort or physicality. The way I put it is, how often does that happen? Not very. But the goal in life, if you're going to be a fisherman, is go out to a lake, say, there's a fish right there, pick out the presentation, go get it. Now, of course, even with aqua-view cameras and stuff like this, it's not that easy. It's never that easy. But the thing I try to encourage people to do is to use your imagination while you're doing this. Like, as I'm talking, as I'm fishing, I'm not thinking about this. I'm not worried about this, what I'm doing with this. This stuff, you'll get it. It's not that hard. Don't think about what you're doing. Think about what you're making that do. Don't think about how to do it. Think about what you're trying to do. There you go. If you analyze what you're trying to do, or how you're doing it, more importantly, you're gonna miss the element of awareness. Because I know so many guys that I take out fishing, have taken out fishing, they're so concerned with this and like how they're supposed to do this. And what I tell them is don't worry about that. Worry about what you want that to do. And the best way to do that is essentially visualize what you're doing as you're doing it. It's amazing how innate this stuff becomes when you do that. Because so right now I'm not thinking about reeling in a spinnerbait and working the rod. I'm imagining my bait down on the bottom, the stuff I'm aware of, this point, this drop off, and I'm imagining when I'm crawling it over, it's giving me data feedback. I'm feeling. Like you want to be connected to the presentation. You want to be really aware of what's going on. Not here, there. This stuff, it's ancillary. It'll figure itself out. The more you start thinking about, imagining, visualizing what you're doing out there, all this how stuff, like how am I supposed to do this, is no. So because we've covered some good depths with some good presentations fairly efficiently on a structure that I know holds fish, and I will not be surprised one bit if we don't come back and get one today off the spot, or two or three. It has happened. Fish don't seem to be super active right now. Even though I'm fishing a fairly, wouldn't call it a super finesse inactive fish presentation, this is a presentation that isn't really necessarily geared to active fish. We're trying to find fish that are parked on the break. They're just relaxing. They're not super active yet. And we're just trying to get this thing in front of their face, let it fall, give it some time. That's the real beauty of the spinnerbait technique like this, is they get two for the price of one. In one retrieve, well, in one motion, you get speed and lift, and then you get a slow fall. I don't know if you can see me doing this on camera, but every once in a while I'll reach down to my side and grab this. It's like one of those little remotes for the all the new trolling motors have these things. The Troves, the Alteras, the Minn Kota X15. A lot of guys, they sell these things. It's a personal thing that I do, but I do encourage people to do it. I know when they sell these things, they have a belt clip. It's kind of hard to get to, but most guys use the lanyard and they wear it around their neck. I don't know if you can see this. I actually like tie it off to my belt loop. And after a very short time, what you'll get to do is you'll start manipulating your boat with, like, in harmony with your presentation. And it'll just be second nature. Like, I don't even think about it. I'll just reach down, hit it, punch it, move it forward. Like on that cast, I'd cast it a little deeper than I thought I did. And I didn't want the tension of the bait falling, because eventually you have a shorter line than you thought and the water's deeper. So the bait starts to swing in because you have a tense line, or you have a tension on the line, you don't have slack. And instead of giving it slack off the bail, I just slightly adjusted the angle of the boat towards it and kind of gave it a little bit of a leash so it could hit the bottom. And that's something I definitely think, of all the modern advancements and things they come out with, graphs, these remote control trolling motors, some guys are really efficient with that foot pedal. It's cool. You can do the same thing. I'm not, and I just like having the ability to move up and down the boat. A lot of times, like if I had gotten a follow, I won't just work it here. Like I'll bring it around, do stuff like this. I can work the whole length of the boat. I've had fish walk around and hit it over there. I'm not just doing a figure eight. And to adapt to that, being able to move and still control the boat while you're moving, only available with this. So, another cool thing. So we've come to the end of this part of it. We're off the point. We're starting to drop now. It's 12 feet. What that tells me, because this is the juncture, tells me now I'm throwing down the break line. So instead of fishing out from it, I'm fishing parallel to it. And I almost always do that if I'm given an option. So we're coming off of it this way. It's intercepting with the side or the main channel actually. And what I like to do then is just take the liberty of realizing where I'm at. I was fishing this side of it, but now because I've finished that, it's put me into position to make another presentation, another cast, where I'm actually working down the length of the break line with this. Now I'm not covering as much of a variable depth. I'm not going from maybe 25 feet up to 5. I might be going anywhere from 9 to 13, maybe 15, but still, always be aware of where you're at in accordance to the area you're fishing, the structure. There's been a lot of times I've caught fish doing something like this. I don't want to say, it kind of looked like it. I'm not going to make a call on that one. I am going to do this for a few more seconds just to make sure. Actually look back on the graph. A lot of times when you have fish come in like that, you actually look back and you can see the fish. Of course, more towards the back of the boat, but sometimes they'll glide off that way. Usually I'm fishing out the back when I'm guiding or taking people out. So it's really easy to see, but the nature of the traditional musky follow, it's not that, like a lot of guys think of follow is, like right now I throw this out, I just threw it up into 5 feet of water, I'm just gonna crank it back. They'll think that fish, like that's how follows are. They just follow in like that. Boy, it's nice when they do. Does not happen super often. But like that last cast, I was bringing it up from 16 feet. Look at that, shad. That's probably what it was. It's probably that school of shad, but that's a good sign. I just saw a gray shape, like kind of come underneath it. Look at that. Guess we're doing something right. It's an illustration of how stupid nature is. It's cool. Make one more cast like this. So before we kind of like change gears, we're going to troll a little bit and check some stuff. Trolling is not just a good way to present baits, it's also a good way to kind of get your bearings on what's going on in the ecosystem. Because like when you're trolling, moving over things at, you know, more rapid pace than you are casting, you're more aware of what's going on. And honestly, a lot of the stuff that the graph does and is able to show you doesn't really work until you get up to maybe 2, 3, 4 miles an hour, where you can actually like kind of make a sweep of it, and then it'll show you like the dimensions of fish and bait balls and stuff. It's not just static on the graph, or not static, but it's not just like random shapes and stuff. It actually shows you what you're going over. Before we do that, I'm going to be super thorough. We are coming back here today. Like, this is the spot this time of year. Like I hit this 4 times a day, maybe. I pay attention. This is like an A-list spot. We're going to hit some other stuff. It's an A-list spot. A lot of big fish come off the spawn and come right here. I'm going to pick a presentation for a bait that I can kind of fish a little bit deeper down this break line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to position this off this point again. And instead of throwing it out, bring it up, I'm going to throw down it with a crankbait. This is what we'll do first. I was going to grab a double 10 or a double 9 that I could slow roll. The thing that sucks about that though is those baits are really bad at snagging. And there's a kite eating tree right over there. Like before they flooded the lake, I swear to God, it ate kites. So I'm gonna take this, and this is a bait. So many people throw shallow. If I'm looking back at the graph to make sure I'm oriented correctly. I'm gonna clip it on. I'm trying to cast down the depth that the boat is sitting. I'm wanting to cast down a break line. So before we were fishing out, we were coming up the ledge. Now I'm wanting to take that vein and I'm wanting to go down it. So we're looking at it from this angle. We're not fishing this way, we're fishing this way. So I'm gonna take a glance, see where we're at on the graph. Perfect. It's like 16, 17 feet, which means we're off this point, which means that cast is probably landing in about 11, 10, probably more 12. Hit bottom. That's all I'm gonna do. Now this looks stupid. But there's a reason I'm doing this. I'm trying to keep the bait down as much as I can. Now this is a single bladed spinner bait. I let it sink to the bottom. It's got some innate lift to it just because of the design, but I'm wanting to keep it down. So I'll actually get down on my knees, as you see in so many bass tournaments, to make sure that I've got my entire rod down in the water so that bait stays as deep as I possibly can while slow reeling it. The cool thing about that little shad body on the back too is if I do happen to do something that makes the blade disengage for a second, I still got that little grub tail on the back, or that shad tail on the back that's still working for me. So that one hit at a certain depth. Now I made a cast maybe about 10 feet to the side of it. It's going to hit a little bit deeper. This is one of those things too, when you're fishing like this, you have to be really, 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 really focused. You have to feel like, is the blade engaged? Is it stuttering? Did I hit something? Did I hit a tree? The other cool thing you need to be aware of too, actually taking a big fish off this spot doing that too, is slow rolling, especially blades, especially double blades. If you're keeping a steady retrieve and the blades stutter, it's one of two things. You either bumped into something or something bumped into you. I've had more than a few times where I've got a fish following down 10, 12, 15 feet. You can't see it down 10, 12, 15 feet. But what I'm paying attention to is sometimes I would feel a stutter. I would feel the blades kind of lock out for a second. And that's a fish that's literally following behind the blade, and just being behind the bait like that, they interrupt the vortex of the water just enough that it messes with the rotation of the blades. That's the kind of attentiveness you have to have to stuff like this, because that stuff like that, that's the kind of thing too, the times I've had fish do that, if I feel any kind of discrepancy like that, I react accordingly at the boat. And a lot of times if you don't, you'll miss the fish. You'll just assume it's not there. Hit the tip. Give me 1 minute, I'm gonna grab a bait from the back. Right. So we threw the bucktail. That's where I talk about, like, don't leave things off the table if they're not musky baits, the bass bait. It doesn't take a lot of hard looking to find, especially with the internet, how many giant muskies have been caught on bass baits by bass guys. And especially in southern reservoirs where they outnumber us like 100 to 1, you can learn a lot of cool tricks from the bass guys. It's one of the best ideas in the world when you're first fishing, especially southern musky reservoir, is if you can go to a bass tournament when they're weighing in and just chit-chat, just idle chit-chat, and you almost sell yourself as a musky bounty hunter, because the guys there, a lot of times they don't like the muskies. They get frustrated with them because they they'll sometimes attack a bass, or when you're fishing a bass tournament for money and you hook into a fish like this is 15 minutes out of your time dealing with this fish and stuff. And so a lot of times they're pretty liberal. They'll be secretive with their bass spots and their bass presentations. The musky stuff, they'll just spill the beans on it. And you can learn some cool tricks with that. This bait actually is not one I was specifically given by a bass guy, but like, you pay attention, you'll start to notice, like the bass guys will tell you what baits the muskies prefer. Out here, sometimes you talk to bass guys, you could run into 5-10 bass guys a day, and all of them will be just up in arms about the muskie that stole their buzzbait. Okay, go get. And the thing too, a lot of people will do is they'll be like, well, and they'll go get a big musky buzzbait. That's not what the fish hit. Fish hit a little buzzbait. So we've got a spinning rod in here with a buzzbait analog on it. Pay attention to stuff like that. But that is one of the coolest little things you can do, is whenever you're musky fishing, especially you're coming in a new body of water, you haven't fished there a long time. It's not cheating. It's just doing your research and your intel. Talk to these bass guys. Like I said, there's all kinds of little nightly tournaments, especially this time of year. I think there's like 4 a week on this lake. There's and these aren't even big ones. These are like little club tournaments and stuff. They usually launch at 5. It's an after work thing. They launch at 5. Most of the guys are pretty cool, but like I said, if you start asking for their bass stuff, they're not going to tell you because they're fishing for money. But if you talk to them about where they had the big muskie hit, they're usually like really, really, really eager to tell you where that is, so you can go catch the fish and hopefully he won't bother them anymore. And that's something that's really, 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 it can shrink some learning curve. It definitely can. There's been a few areas that just from looking at a map, well, I'd be like, they're good. But after you talk to how many bass guys, so many sob stories about how many muskies have gotten off or stolen their bait, and then you go investigate and you find out they weren't lying. If you get really lucky, which doesn't happen very often, you'll find out about a resident fish that's up somewhere. Like these guys, it's like there'll be bass guys that have long-standing grudges with individual big fish that'll be stayed in an area for a while. And those are the fun ones, because that's when they're talking about like a low 50-inch fish that's taken and set up camp for a while. And they'll talk to you about, this fish on this tree on this point been bothering me for 2 months. I'll tell you what, you tell me where to go get them. I'll go take care of them for you, sir. We're not killing them, but I know we're talking about southern reservoirs and there are walleye here, but one of the things that I think a lot of guys might overlook is, bass fishing is a big thing up north. But you can learn like a lot from the walleye guys, because the walleye guys troll. The walleye guys fish a lot of structure. A lot of them are very more attuned to structure than bass guys are. Okay, well, when I'm doing this crankbait like this, the reason I picked this crankbait, and actually not a musky crankbait, is ironically enough, a lot of the musky crankbaits, they're designed for like a faster retrieve. Like they dive. There's a few, and when I say a few, I mean maybe a handful, but they're big. That are designed to have a really steep dive curve and a slow retrieve rate. But these bass cranks, you have to think, these guys, trolling's not part of bass culture. So when they make these crankbaits, they make them to have a maximum dive curve and a depth on a cast length. So like the diving depth of a crankbait for a musky crank, it's more geared towards the trolling depth of it, because trolling is a part of musky fishing. Not so much with bass fishing. So any kind of the diving baits that they make, they're designing them to have the maximum diving depth on a cast. So instead of going like this or like that on a dive curve, the bass baits are designed more to go like that. Now a bait like this is a Rick Clunn, it's called the Freak. And I like it because I can actually throw it on the heavy tackle. Doesn't interrupt the action. I don't have to bump down on my leader or line pound test. I don't have to throw it on a spinning rod like some cranks to get the maximum effect. You can go to any Dick's Sporting Goods, Bass Pro Shops, and you can just start looking around. They make Skeet Reese crankbaits that are fantastic. The DT series, or not the, well, yeah, the Rapala DT series is great. The 10XD, it's a fantastic bass crankbait that's a musky analog crank. But this bait I like in particular just because it has a really nice slow action. It has a little bit of a wander to it. And you can tell I'm not like, just to demonstrate, I ain't going like this. Not saying a fish wouldn't hit that. I'm not going like this. I'm reeling that so slow, literally reeling it to where I know I'm still getting depth out of it, but it's barely moving. I just want it to barely work. And I can tell too, like when I get down, especially like this, because you know, this is a bass crank. I'm down like this and I can feel it hit the bottom, like there, I'm on bottom. But I can feel myself on the bottom right now. And I'll let it dig for a second. You don't want to dig it too hard. You just kind of want to tap the bottom and occasionally let it rise. And a lot of times the fish is there, that's when they'll hit it, is when you let it just back up a little bit. Something bass cranks are just fantastic at, the musky cranks. They're just not designed to do that. And honestly, with the availability of bass cranks like this, that are built pretty solid and with like just a little bit of adaptation, you can make them like super musky tough. You notice too, my figure 8, like I don't even see my bait. I don't know where it's at. I mean, I know where it's at, but it's down there. That's because I'm wanting to do this figure 8 turn. I'm not wanting to bring this fish up right now. If there's a fish beneath it, I don't want him to come up to the boat yet. I want to leave him in his comfort zone. I've watched fish abandon following a crankbait like this as it comes up to the surface. Like you'll watch some guys won't stick their rod tip in the water, or they're too lazy, and you'll watch fish follow it up, and then as soon as they see you at the surface, gone. They just don't want to mess with it. But if you keep it down there like that and you do your figure 8, you'd be amazed. Well, that fish I got last week with Chris, doing that bait with this thing. And it wasn't big, but it's the only fish we caught that day. It's the only fish we saw that day. Well, Chris had a nice one, hit a bait. But I'd probably done 8 turns like that. And then all of a sudden the fish came up and grabbed it. See there, I'm on the bottom, right there. Yeah, if I recommend any bass crank for stuff like this, see there's the tree. I can feel myself bringing it through that stump right now. So when I do that, I hit the stump, let it rise. Hit the stump, let it rise. Take its time. Knocking on heaven's door, high. Sorry about that. Well, you just asked the question I was talking earlier about making baits musky tough. One of the cool things about this bait, ironically, is you don't really have to. Like a lot of these baits come out of the box like this, they're pretty well built, and this is one of them. The hooks, you can do little things, which I can demonstrate, but like a lot of them, some of the Rapala ones, they have a little bit lighter components than normal. This bait out of the box, this Rick Clunn Freak is really good for that. Sometimes what I'll do though is they have these things called suspend strips, and I don't know if you're aware of them. It's a bass thing too. You can actually take suspend strips and suspend dots. They're an adhesive little lead product. You peel them off the patch, you put them down the side. I've done that to make them hang a little bit more. You can weight the baits. You can put a little bit bigger hooks on it, which actually kind of serves the same function too. The only thing you have to be careful with some of this stuff is some of these lighter baits like this. What'll happen is they're designed to work with these components, and because they're smaller, they're more sensitive to weight changes and stuff like that. So if you put you can't put like giant hooks on it; it'll mess with the action. But you can put some stouter hooks on it. These are actually really good. But like the trocar hooks, stuff like that. There's a lot of hooks you kind of have to watch for out of the box, but these are really good. The DT series as well has a really good quality component to it. I know I talked about that, but yeah, ironically, some of these bass baits are built musky tough. There are some things that I'll do, definitely when I do this, though. One thing I would highly recommend is setting your drag just a little bit lighter. And that's really important. You can fish these small, like the 10XD in this bait, just as well as you can on a spinning rod or a lighter bait casting rod. And actually, I prefer to do it like this because honestly, you can go down in the line diameter. You might get a little bit more depth out of it. Not a lot. Not with some of these. Sometimes it makes a big difference. If you can't tell, I've got like a lot of confidence in doing this because I'm still doing it. Tell you what, let's go do something really cool. We're gonna go right over there. I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna show you how you can use these. I'm fishing structure right now. When I say structure, topography. I don't call trees structure. Structure is topography. Trees on structure are part of structure. Trees in and of themselves are not structure. But I'm gonna show you one of the cool things you can do with a bait like this, which they're actually like, there's no analog to this. There's nothing that does it quite as well, is fishing through deep timber and being able to take baits through and get them back out alive. And not only that, be able to pick it apart and actually pull fish out of it that otherwise you're just too busy being snagged up, hung up. And we're actually gonna take this, we're gonna go around the corner, we're gonna fish a couple trees that hold fish this time of year off a deep bank. Like the fish, some moved out here. There's a deep bank in here that I know holds fish year round because the trees are set up in deep water. I'm going to show you how to do a little bit of that too, because that's actually really, really useful skill. And not a lot of musky guys do that. Not a lot of musky guys really take the time. They'll fish 2 trees, they'll throw a bucktail, they'll throw a bulldog, whatever, and they'll bring it back. But then they don't realize that trees aren't structure, but they can serve as one in a sense. So like we're going to go fish some trees back here that literally are almost like points leading into deep water. And this is how we're going to pick them apart. We're going to make a couple casts with like traditional musky presentation just to see. I don't feel like there's anything active right now. But then we're going to start going down with this. We're going to start picking it apart a little bit. And you can do that. You can pick a tree apart in 5 minutes or less. But it might be the thing that saves your day. Trust me on that. All right, well, as promised, I was going to show you what I was talking about concerning trees. So we're not very far from where we're fishing near the main channel. In fact, we're very close, like literally maybe 2-3 kicks of the tail for a fish. But one of the things I like to teach people and break down is you read so many things. I mean, you even read this in biology books written about different species is, well, what kind of habitat, like what do muskies like, or what does this fish like to live in? Well, they like to live in trees, and I see no muskies in those trees. There are, I wouldn't say they're misconceptions, but they have to be put into context. A tree is a tree. That's it. A tree has no relevance to a fish's existence unless it's placed somewhere to where it has a relevance to a fish's existence. So you look at something like this, and the biggest way that I judge the value of a tree in most cases is the angle at which it sits in the water. Now, of course, submerged trees, like we were fishing the stump earlier, that's different. But like the laydowns, that's what most people are talking about when they say go fish the trees. And there are some rare exceptions, but like you would look at this instance and you would see a tree angled like this, like straight out, maybe less than 30 degrees like this. Depending on the situation, I would never call that tree above a C+, maybe a B. Because the angle of the tree itself, that's a rare exception because it actually extends out to deep water. They'll move up to it. but it doesn't go to deep water. The deeper the angle of the tree, the more of a role it's serving to augment the topography. So you look at something like this, and it's really cool to watch in reservoirs how this works, because you have to think too, like once upon a time there was no lake. This was a valley, and this was a small valley into the big valley, and these were two little creeks, or a creek hitting a river. And these trees grew here. Well, then they flooded it, and sometimes they go to the effort to clean it out. Of course they did this. So when you come to the bank, now you're dealing with a different situation. Now the ecosystem has moved, the water's here, and this is the bank. Well, now you've got erosion. So over time, as we come through, we drive our boats and there's waves and stuff. What happens is a lot of the soil that serves as a support structure for these roots of these trees gives way. And you can see this is like one of the best examples I've ever seen of it. You have to think too, the deeper the bank, the more erosion that's going to occur. There's no backing, there's no support from underneath. So the more erosion that occurs against these steep banks, the more likely you're going to have trees go and fall down. So when you look at something like this, look at these trees that we have had falling down here. This bank is, we're in 17 or 20 feet right now. That's pretty deep for a cove, and we're not far from the main channel. You look at something like this, this is deep enough for fish to take some residence for a while. Like they'll stay in areas like this for a little bit, especially being this close to the channel. So when you look at trees and you start going down the bank, you'll notice tree goes like that, tree goes like that. That big one in the middle is a masterpiece of a tree. Like you can't see it yet, but there's a stump sticking out of the water, and that's it. And the tree literally goes all the way out here, and it fell from that bank. You can see that washout. Like that is a prime example of nature creating a habitat where once there was none. And because there's very little structure, topography there, the deep water was there. The deep water is the most essential element to have fish in an ecosystem. You have to have deep water, the deepest water in the area. But then there was very little topography. It was just straight up and down until nature went. Now there's this big biodegradable point, literally. This is what a tree is, a biodegradable point. And it made a point into the deep water off the deep bank. And now there's so much more life there because of that. Now you take a look and we'll show some other trees, but like you can pan over to this shore and see this, like right off this bank. I don't fish that bank too much. Never really done too well off that bank. Not saying there's not fish that don't use it, but the reason is the channel swings in on this side. This is the side that the creek flowed out of and hit the main channel. Those trees over there, almost every tree that hits the water, it's like this. And the break line is actually out off the bank. So those trees, a lot of times, they're not even getting out to deep water at all. In fact, there's probably a lot of fish that don't even know those trees exist because of the fact that they're relating from deep water to shallow water. There's a break line between them and that tree, and they might not ever get to the tree for all they know. They may not ever even know that tree exists. But you take deep water and you fling a tree out into the middle of it, now it's in their realm. So right now what we're doing first is I'm just going to take this glide bait, work it down this bank a little bit through these trees. I'm not trying to get into the timber, I'm just trying to kind of work over it. Then what we're going to do, this is kind of a neutral, somewhat aggressive tactic. Then what we'll do is we'll put that bass crankbait on again. And I'll show you how to pick these things apart. Come on, fish. Come on, fish. So essentially, breaking that down from what I just said, the way I like to treat trees, not all trees are created equal. If you start thinking about fishing the trees, you're going to spend a lot of time fishing trees that aren't worth a dang. The way I like to look at trees is, like I kind of said jokingly earlier, they're biodegradable points. That's it. I treat a tree no differently than I do a point. I value it based on the same circumstances, on the same criterion. How deep of water does it go into? All that stuff. And there are literally guys, and most of them, it's not anyone's fault. It's just, this is what they're introduced to, is they're told that, well, fish like trees, muskies like trees. No. They will relate to trees that fit the criterion to be a good habitat, but they're not innately drawn to trees themselves. All right, so this is kind of cool. Right now I'm using a glide bait to really kind of pick this apart. The cool thing about glide baits, and they come in probably more shapes and sizes than any other musky bait there is. And it's one of those things too, it's not strictly musky fishing, but usually the physics behind these baits don't really come into play once they get up to about this size. Like the smaller a glider, the harder it is to actually duplicate some of the things where you're balancing out the weight and the shape to where it actually kind of works to have that gliding action. So it's something that's really kind of just endemic to musky fishing. But what's cool is they come in all different shapes and sizes. They have ones that skim the surface. They have ones that sink down, slow fall. Some are really just kind of useless. I won't name any names. But this is one. It's actually made by a friend of mine. It's called a tail gunner. And this bait is not very old. But the cool thing about this bait, the first thing I noticed when I worked it is, yay, it glides back and forth, so it does what it's supposed to. Like I said earlier with the spinnerbait, one of the things I always see when I first pick up a bait is, what does it do when I do nothing at all? See that rocking motion back and forth? That's really special. There's a few glide baits that kind of do it. I've never seen one do it that well. But the coolest thing about this bait is I could let it hit the bottom right now. I could pop my rod tip, and with a little bit of practice, a little bit of English, you can actually make the bait glide out underneath the water. Most glide baits really only work if they're coming at the boat and they're coming in less than 5 feet of water. This bait, you can work down 15, 20, well, almost as deep as you want. So literally what I'm doing is I'm throwing it. It's on the bank. I'll pop it a good couple times first. Work it side to side, twitching it like this. And as I move out deeper, I'll start slowing it. I'll let it sink. Now once again, we were talking about the spinnerbait, where they hit it on the fall. Exact same thing. I switch the angle of my rod, because now I'm not wanting to rip it out. I'm wanting to make a direct line of contact to the bait. And I'm going to get a lot more direct line if I'm popping it up than I am to the side. So it takes a little bit of a feel, but all I'm doing is just popping it enough to turn it, let it fall. And that's something that's pretty unique to this glide bait, to be honest with you. I'm a big fan of it. Get a little bit closer so we'll... There it comes. I'll let it fall a little bit. Nope, wait, shit. That glare. Yep, there's one. Come on, come on, come on. Polarized glasses, wear them. Don't be dumb like me. That was a nice fish, dude. Where'd she go? Where'd she go? Where'd she go? That was a really nice fish. deep. Don't laugh, I'm actually doing this for a reason. Sometimes that fish was not very active. She was active enough to come out of that tree. So when I see a situation like that, where I'll be honest, I don't think I could have caught that fish on that bait with that cast right there. I would have been very lucky. I would have had to dial in something, but it was just enough to get her interested. The fish was not very active at all. The fish was... And see, that was like... Wear 'em. Like that, if I hadn't been paying attention to that bait and looking, even with these on, I wouldn't have seen that fish. No, I literally, she was down maybe 2 feet beneath it. I got her to come up. And all I saw was like the little white fleck. They get the inside of their mouth when they do that. And I saw that and I looked and I'm like, oh, that's fish. But see, that's one of those instances too, and I hope we get to illustrate this today where that's a very non-traditional follow. So, what we'll do with that is we won't beat her to death, because I'm pretty sure she's already back to where she was. What we're gonna do is take a cue from that. So I'm going to move off this just a bit. We're going to slowly angle around. I'm going to do a slightly different presentation. Might seem a little bit more intrusive, but if anything, one of the cool things topwater does is it does wake them up a little bit. I'm going to make a few casts with a small topwater into those trees and just work it out really slow and give it a pause. Then we're going to go through that crankbait. Like maybe not right now. Maybe not right now. But very likely that at some point today, if we came back here at the right time and did the right thing, the fish would come back. That was a really nice fish. One of the things I really hope I get to illustrate today is the porpoise theory. I have a theory that like it's not some outlandish or esoteric fact to know that muskies are known for porpoising. As in, you'll see them literally come up and just, like, when you first take people out fishing, especially for muskie like this, a lot of times they get excited when they see the little splashes and stuff like that. They're like, oh, that's a fish. And I'm like, no, that's not a muskie. What I do tell them to watch out for, you don't see muskies do a lot of that, rarely ever. What you do see though, is you'll see fish porpoise. And after a while, you get to where you've got a pretty uncanny eye for noticing it. So far, I've not seen any today. But usually what happens is you'll see a porpoise like that, where literally it's just their back comes up. It's almost like nobody, at least from what I've read and studied, nobody really has a real answer for it. What I have noticed though, it always seems to be larger fish. It always seems to be fish over 45 inches almost every time. And it almost always is a prelude to activity by anywhere from 15 minutes to 45 minutes. So if I start seeing a fish porpoise, I get excited. It doesn't happen all the time, but like it happens more than sex panther, more than 60%. So it's an interesting little thing they do. Obviously they do it for a reason because they're animals. And you hear so many stupid things about like, well, they're looking to see what's going on up there. Come on. There is a fish that does that in South America called an arapaima. It's actually pretty interesting. But they breathe air, so they do that all the time. These fish don't breathe air. They do have an air bladder. So my theory is, after watching these fish do this and seeing it usually be like a precursor to an activity period, my theory is they're actually gearing up to spend time in shallow water because they have an air bladder, you know? So like they have to expend energy to stay shallow if they don't have the buoyancy to support their weight. So when they go deep, they can let air out all day long. They can't take in air underneath the water. They can't, you know, fill their air bladder. So honestly, what I feel like it is it's fish that are larger. And they're not doing this, and you know, they're not doing this by their own intelligence. This is just kind of what they're programmed to do. They can sense the conditions getting more active. Their body's reacting to this, knowing that it's going to be spending time in shallow water. And they literally come up and gulp air in preparation for that. It's my theory. We're going to be looking for it today, especially as the water gets warmer. You see it way more. So we had a fall from a really nice fish on a glide bait, which honestly I was not even expecting right now. So right now I'm positioning myself to do the same thing I was doing with the crankbait earlier, except now I'm fishing it through timber. And we're going to do a little bit of this today, but this is something that, like we were talking about trees, guys will fish the trees and then that's kind of it. Like they'll just fish the tree. But just like people don't really pick apart structure, they don't pick apart trees too much either. This is something that I'm really a big fan of. You notice I'm down on my knees again because I'm wanting this bait to get as deep as I possibly can on this cast. And basically what I'm doing is I'm just bringing it through the branches around the side, literally covering the tree as best as I can as it slopes out to deep water. I'm keeping paying a lot of attention to the feel of my bait. When it hits a branch, I'll back off, let it rise. Develop a good sidearm cast. It comes in handy.